Grace Family Chapel presents The Revelation of Grace. Here is your host, Pastor Boniface Odhiambo. Welcome our viewers. My name is Pastor Boniface Odhiambo. I'm just too much blessed to come into your homes today with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And right now I'm tackling a topic on the end times. This is one of the topics which I really feel in the spirit that we really need to learn and understand more what the Bible speaks about the end times. Because we are living in days when people know that we are on the end times, and there are so many events people are expecting to happen. And that one has led to many Christians somehow to relax a bit. It's like we have finished the job, so we're just waiting for one event and then we are out of this place. And I want us to understand, when the Bible speaks about the end times, when the writers of the epistles were writing about the end times, what was really in their minds? What were they thinking about when they speak about the end times? What was really moving them? What is this time of the end that they were seeing and they were writing about? That is the discussion I want us to have today in this telecast. And we've been focusing on the Olivet Discourse. This is the sermon which Jesus gave when he was seated on Mount Olives, just after coming to Jerusalem, just the last week before he was arrested and crucified and he died. And you know, what somebody says on his last days are quite important. So let's go to Matthew 24 and read about this Olivet Discourse, which we find in Matthew 24. We also find the same in Luke 21, and we find the same also in Mark 13. It is only the Gospel of John which doesn't have the Olivet Discourse. And we shall know why John does not write in his epistle about the Olivet Discourse. Because John gave a more elaborate happenings of the Olivet Discourse in his writing of the book of Revelation. Revelation is the fulfillment of this prophetic word which Jesus gives in Matthew 24. Let's read Matthew 24 and see what Jesus says. It says this: "And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to shew him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another, that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" So the disciples asked three questions. When shall these things be? What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? In many versions, you go and check that word is the word aeon. And the word aeon, it means the age. So they were asking about, when shall the end of this age come? These questions came about when Jesus talked about the destruction of the temple. Because the disciples were showing Jesus how the temple was magnificent, how it looked so nice, the building was so beautiful. And they wanted at least Jesus to comment about it. And Jesus told them, you see, this temple you are seeing here, there shall not be one stone left on top of another. In other words, he was telling them, this temple, a time is coming. It will be destroyed. It will be thrown down. It will be burnt. It will not exist anymore. And to the Jews, that was the center of their worship. When somebody spoke about the destruction of the temple, it is like the destruction of the entire system of their worship, because their system of worship was concentrated on only one place. That was the temple. They were to travel from all over the world and come and gather around that place, offer sacrifices there, offer their tithes and all that. It was to be offered in that place. So it was the center of Judaism. So for Jesus to say that this thing will be no more, he was directly attacking that system and speaking an end of that era of worship and that era of the Mosaic law and of animal sacrifices. Now, let's look at another parable which Jesus gave earlier about what was to come. Let's go to Matthew 21, and we are reading from verses 33. And here it says this. Here another parable. There was a certain householder which planted a vineyard and hedged it round about, and digged a winepress in it, and built a tower, and let it out to husbandmen, and went into a far country. And when the time of the fruit drew near, he sent his servants to their husbandmen, that they might receive the fruits of it. And the husbandman took his servants, and beat one, and killed another, and stoned another. Again he sent the other servants more than the first, and they did unto them likewise. But last of all he sent unto them his son, saying, They will reverence my son. But when the husbandmen saw the son, they said among themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize on his inheritance. And they caught him, and cast him out of the vineyard, and slew him. When the Lord therefore of the vineyard cometh, what will he do unto those husbandmen? Then listen to their answer. They say unto him, He will miserably destroy those wicked men, and will let out his vineyard unto other husbandmen, which shall render him the fruit in their season. Jesus said unto them, Did ye never read in the scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, the same is become the head of the corner? This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore say I unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you, and given to a nation, bringing forth the fruits thereof. And whosoever shall fall on this stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it shall grind him to powder. And when the chief priests and Pharisees had heard his parables, they perceived that he spoke of them. Hear that. The Pharisees were there listening to him. When Jesus gave this parable about this husbandman who let out his vineyard to workers, and they destroyed them, then he sent his own son, and they killed him. And the multitude said clearly, when the owner of the vineyard comes, he will destroy those workers and hand it over to other people who will be able to bring forth fruit of it. So the Pharisees somehow perceived that Jesus was talking straight about them. It was not about us who are living 2,000 years later. He was talking about them, promising the destruction of that nation and handing the kingdom to another people who will be able to bring fruits thereof. So whatever Jesus was speaking about the temple is connected to this, because the Jewish center of worship was the temple. And this parable speaks clearly about what was to happen, the destruction which was to come. And he promised them that when the owner of the vineyard returns, he will destroy it and give it to another who will be able to bring forth fruit. Unfortunately, most of us are still expecting the husbandman to come and destroy another temple, which today does not exist, and hand over the kingdom to another people. So I wonder which those other people will be. Because here clearly, that generation which Jesus was speaking about, they were standing right before him, and they were listening to him, and they perceived he was talking right to their faces. He was talking about them, not about us who are living today, 2,000 years. He was addressing a people who are living at that time. And that's why last week, when we talked about this, Jesus was quoting from Matthew 23, from verses 35 to 38, and he said, this generation, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zacharias, who was killed between the altars, will be required of this generation. So it was a specific generation he was talking about. And therefore, when he promised and he spoke about the signs of the end of the age, he spoke about the wars and rumors of wars. He spoke about the gospel being preached unto the ends of the earth. And next time we shall go and see that one, that at that time, by the time the destruction of the temple was happening, the gospel already had reached the entire corner of the known world at that time. And Paul speaks about it in Colossians, and also other writers write about how the gospel already had reached the corners of the earth at that time. So we shall go and see that one in details. So whatever Christ was speaking about here, it was speaking about the coming to the end of the Mosaic age, the coming to an end of the age of the law, the coming to an end of the temple sacrifices. Let us see how Paul writes about it also in Hebrews. Hebrews is written in AD 65. Let's begin chronologically and begin with AD 57. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verses 29. And we see what Paul writes to the Corinthians. And this one is in AD 57. And Paul writes this in AD 57 in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 29. He says, "But this I say, brethren, the time is short. It remaineth that both they that have wives be as though they had none." He says the time is short. That is AD 57. And he's saying the time is short. If you had an understanding that 2,000 years later, there are people who will still be preaching the same gospel, still waiting for that end to come, then he couldn't have said the time is short. He must have been having another timeline he was looking at, and not the timelines we are looking at today. So he says the time is short. And then in verse 31 he says this, "And they that use this world are as not abusing it, for the fashion of this world passeth away." He says the fashion or the form of the present world is passing away. What present world were they living under? The old covenant system was still in operation. The animal sacrifices were still going on in the temple. That form of worship, that form of the world which they were living in, was passing away, and they were seeing it going. And Jesus gave them the signs clearly of when this end is coming. It was approaching. They were seeing it. It was knocking at the door. And he says, this world is, this form of this world, of this present world, is passing away. Again, in 1 Corinthians in chapters 11, 1 Corinthians in chapters 10, and we are reading verses 11. He writes and he says this, "Now all these things happened unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come." He speaks, it was written, the scriptures were written as examples, and for admissions, upon whom the ends of the world, the ends of the age has come. Which age is ending? The Mosaic age is ending. The covenant, the old covenant age is coming to an end. The sacrificial system is coming to an end. That is the end they were looking at. That is the end which Christ pointed at, when the temple will be no more, when the temple will be destroyed, and when there'll be no place for the Jews to worship anymore, because that system was coming to an end. Upon whom the ends of the world are come. Let's look at Hebrews. Hebrews is written in AD 65. Hebrews chapter 1. And from verses 1, it says this, "God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spoke in past time unto the fathers by the prophets, hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds." Now listen to this. He says God spoke to our fathers. God in sundry times and diverse manner spoke to our fathers, their fathers, the Jews, by the prophets. Then he says, hath in these last days spoken unto us. They were living in the last days. Which last days? The last days of the Mosaic system. The last days of the old covenant. That covenant had to disappear before the new one fully takes effect. So they're already living in the last days. Now, let's look at Hebrews chapter 8, which makes it much more clearer. Hebrews chapter 8, and we are reading from verses 13. He says this, "In that he saith a new covenant, he hath made the first old. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away. When God is now bringing in a new covenant, he has made the old Mosaic one. He has made it already old. And he says, now that which is decaying, he says it is decaying. At that time, that system was still functioning, but it was decaying. They were seeing all the signs which Jesus gave of the destruction of the temple. They were now happening. They could see it in their own eyes. In AD 65, they could see the rumors of wars and the rebellion among the Jews, and that one was instigating the attack from the Romans to come and destroy finally this thing, as Jesus already had predicted. So he says, now that which decayeth and waxeth old is ready to vanish away. At that time the temple is still standing in AD 65, but it is ready to vanish away. The end of that age of sacrifices is coming. It's almost. So that's why he says it is ready to vanish away. And then also in Hebrews chapter 9 and verses 8 to 10. Hebrews 9 and verses 8 to 10. He writes and he says this: the Holy Ghost, this signifying that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while as the first tabernacle was yet standing. He says, as long as the temple was still existing, the way into the holiest, the way into the, let me repeat this, that the way into the holiest of all was not yet made manifest, while the first tabernacle was yet standing, which was a figure of the time then present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect, as pertaining to the conscience, which stood only in meats and drinks, and diverse washings and carnal ordinances imposed on them until the time of reformation. So there was a time of reformation which they had been waiting upon, and that time had already come, but most of the Jews were still stuck with that system of worship. They were not recognizing the perfect sacrifice of Christ, which could purge their conscience from dead works. They were still continuing in that form of worship. And he writes, as long as this tabernacle is still standing here, it is a clear indication that the way into the holiest of all, the way of people now coming to worship God wholeheartedly, was not yet manifest. Why? Because this was still a hindrance. It was hindering people from seeing the clear picture of what Christ has already accomplished. So it had to go. But at that time, it was still standing. Again, we see this one in 1 John chapter 2 and verses 18. Little children, it is the last hour. And as ye have heard that Antichrist shall come, even now are there many antichrists, whereby we know that it is the last time. This is now in AD 67. Remember, Jesus told them, this generation shall not pass before all these things are fulfilled. He said, heaven and earth can pass, but not even a jot of the law can pass. So remember, when he speaks about heaven and earth passing away, Jesus was not implying a physical earth. When you look at your Bible in the Old Testament, the destruction of Babylon was referred to the falling down of heavens and earth. If the destruction of Babylon was referred to the falling of heaven and earth, in the same manner, the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple was also equal to the passing away of heavens and earth. So Jesus was not implying to this physical earth disappearing, because the Jews, they saw the temple as the connecting point between the heaven and the earth. And they referred to the temple as the heavens and its surroundings as the earth. And that is why when the writer of Hebrews writes about Jesus, he said that Jesus never entered the heavens made by human hands. Why? Because there was a heavens made by human hands in Jerusalem. He entered the heavens itself. So when he says heaven and earth shall pass away, but not a single jot of the law shall be removed without being fulfilled. Now, today, we don't practice the law anymore, but the earth is still here. Now, which heaven and earth has passed? It is that heavens and earth which the Jews knew about, their temple and their way of worship. That was their heaven, that was their earth, and that is what God took away. It is gone, and it is gone with the system of the Jewish worship. Or else Jesus is wrong when he says that not a single jot of the law shall be removed You see, we no longer practice the law. Even the Jews who are living today in Jerusalem, they're no longer offering animal sacrifices. Why? Because that heaven and earth disappeared with that system. It went. That covenant disappeared. So let me just bring it to your understanding here in this diagram which I've drawn here, at least to help us understand exactly what I'm talking about. Now, this circle will help us to understand what I'm talking about. This circle here, or this sphere, it is depicting the old covenant. From Exodus in the Old Testament, Exodus 24, when Moses makes a covenant with the Jews, the old covenant starts here in Exodus 24. This covenant continues even after the cross. When Jesus comes and dies in AD 30, Jesus is crucified, he dies, he resurrects, he ascends to heaven, and he told them, this generation shall not pass away. A generation biblically takes a period of 40 years. We can read that one in Hebrews 3 and Hebrews 4, when he speaks about the generation in the wilderness, and we know they were 40 years in the wilderness. So a generation takes a period of 40 years. Historically, we know the temple came down between AD 70, between AD 68 there to AD 70, most precisely in AD 70. That is when the temple and everything in it was destroyed, and Jerusalem was destroyed, and it became desolate in AD 70. So this time period, this 40-year period, this generation is what Christ is talking about. And this is the time when the apostles are writing their epistles. So what is the end? What end are they seeing? Are they seeing this far end we are living in 2,000 years later? No. They are seeing this end. They are seeing AD 70 is approaching. That is why they're writing, the end is near. The end is near. The time is now. The time is at hand. Why? They are seeing this end. They are seeing everything Jesus predicted was now taking shape. And they are seeing all the signs of the destruction of the temple taking shape. And finally, the temple was destroyed. The temple fell in AD 70, and the end of this Mosaic age finally came. The end of the Mosaic age finally came. And the new covenant took off when Christ was crucified on the cross of Calvary. That was the beginning of the new covenant. And the new covenant took off, and the new covenant continues until today. So the happenings in the Olivet Discourse, which Christ predicted, are not things which he was talking about a generation which will come 2,000 years later. He was talking to the people about the temple they were seeing in their eyes. He was not telling them a temple will be built again 2,000 years later. And then in that very, very one is when all these things will happen. No, he told them, look, no stone will be left on top of another in that one which they were seeing there. So the events they were expecting to happen happened at that time. So the book of Revelation is not about things which are going to happen in the future. The book of Revelation speaks about what was to happen at that time. In fact, when John is writing, he's told right, because these things are at hand. Let me read in Revelation chapter 22 and verses 10, and we see what the writer here says. He says this, and he said unto me, seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. You see, the Revelation was just written a few years before AD 70 happened. I know there are people who want to postpone it and put it maybe in AD 96 and all that, because when the book of Revelation is written, the temple is still standing. And that is why we see them measuring the temple. Why? Because it was still standing. In AD 96, there was no temple. So the book of Revelation was written before AD 70. And the writings of Revelation, they reveal exactly what happened at this time. At this time. And that is why John is told, don't seal. Daniel, when he was writing about things which were to happen 400 years later, he was told, seal. It's far away. In Daniel 12 and verse 4. And also verse 9. Revelation, if he was writing about things which were to happen 2,000 years later, why was he being told, don't seal it? Because Revelation is something which already has happened. It's about the revelation of Jesus Christ. It's about the fulfillment of the old covenant curses coming upon the Jews. And when Moses gave the covenant, God spoke to him, Deuteronomy 31, and he told him, write a song. This song will be sung to remind the Jews of how they have failed to keep the law. And we see it clearly here in Revelation 15. They sang the song of Moses and they sang the song of the Lamb. The song of Moses reminding them how they had never kept the law and the curses which were now coming upon them, the punishment, the plagues which were going to befall upon them. And the song of the Lamb for the new covenant people whom Jesus had forgiven their sins, had cleansed them by his own blood. They were singing the song of the Lamb and the song of Moses for the Jews who are going to face calamity. So Revelation speaks about events which have taken place, but also it speaks about events which we are living in right now. When it speaks of, I saw a new heaven and I saw a new earth. For the old one, the old heaven and the old earth are no more. What are those old heavens and the old earth? I know there are people who are expecting this earth to be wound up and destroyed. We shall see in our next study scriptures which clearly tell us that the world is given to man for posterity, and the world is here to stay forever. God has no business destroying this world. The world which we're talking about was the old covenant system. That was the world, the earth, and the heavens of the Jews. And that world was wound up. It was destroyed. It is no more. And today, we are at the new heaven. We are the city which John saw coming out of heavens, adorned as the bride, as the Lamb's wife. We are that city. We are a city on a hill, which cannot be hidden. We are the new Jerusalem, which the writer of Hebrews writes and says, we have come to Mount Zion. We have come to the heavenly Jerusalem. We have come to the city of the living God. We have come to an innumerable company of angels. We have come to the church of the firstborns, whose names are written in heavens. We have come to God, the judge of all. We have come to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant. We have come to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than the blood of Abel. We have come to the spirits of just men made perfect. We have come, not we shall come. That is where the church is today. And if we don't understand that, we shall still be living expecting another heavens, expecting another earth to come, expecting another covenant to be rolled out. It is about the disappearing of the old and the coming in of the new, which we are supposed to live and enjoy today. So don't be caught up still in the systems of the old that already have been taken off. Already God is done with it. Already God has no plan anymore for it. Be concerned about the new one which has come and live in it as if there is nothing else you are waiting for. It is the reality that we are living in today, the manifestation of Christ. It's about the revelation of Jesus Christ in our lives. Let us make him revealed and manifested to the world we are living in today. Join us in our next telecast. We shall be expounding more on the Olivet Discourse and also on the book of Revelation. God bless you and see you next week.